The steel bollards slammed into my private road before I even had time to put my truck in park. I heard the hydraulic drill before I saw the crew, a violent metallic grinding that shook through the morning air and rattled the windows of my farmhouse. When I stepped out, the smell of diesel exhaust and fresh-cut steel hit me first. 3 workers in orange vests were driving bright yellow posts into the gravel lane that led from the county road to my house, the same 400-yard stretch of road I had owned, maintained, and paid taxes on for years. My driveway was disappearing one piece of metal at a time. "Hold up," I called, walking toward them. "Who authorized this?" The foreman looked over his shoulder like he had already answered that question 100 times. "Cedar Ridge Estates," he said. "Emergency Access Improvement Project." He pointed at a freshly installed sign beside the road. "Cedar Ridge Estates Emergency Access Route." That sign bothered me more than the steel. Because my road wasn't Cedar Ridge Estates property. It was mine. I'm Ethan Caldwell. I'm 42 years old, and I've spent most of my career designing roads, studying traffic flow, and figuring out how people safely move through spaces they don't always understand. I wasn't the kind of person who looked for fights with neighbors. My wife Sarah and I bought this property because we wanted quiet, not conflict. But standing there with gravel dust sticking to my boots and a construction crew blocking the only entrance to my home, quiet was already gone. "What happens if I need to get my truck through?" I asked. The foreman shrugged. "You'll have to coordinate with the HOA." That sentence was when I knew something was wrong. Not because he sounded rude, because he sounded trained. Like someone had already decided I was no longer the person in charge of my own property. Then Victoria Harrington arrived. She stepped out of a black SUV carrying a leather folder, wearing the calm expression of someone walking into a meeting she had already won. "Ethan," she said with a smile. "I was hoping we could avoid making this dramatic." Victoria was the president of Cedar Ridge Estates HOA. For 3 years, she had been the person everyone saw when a mailbox was the wrong color or a fence was 2 inches too tall. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. She preferred paperwork. "We're improving emergency access for the community," she said, opening the folder. "This benefits everyone." I looked down at the documents she handed me. The paper was thick, official-looking, expensive, but I noticed something strange. Every page talked about emergency access. Not ownership, not purchase, not an easement, just access. I kept my face neutral and handed the papers back. "I'll review these," I said. Victoria's smile tightened for half a second. "You should understand, Ethan. Communities change. Sometimes individual preferences have to make room for safety." I watched her walk back to her SUV while the workers continued drilling. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the bollards. Not the sign. The confidence. She wasn't asking permission. She was acting like permission had already been granted. Before I went inside, I walked the edge of the road and checked the work myself. Near the base of the nearest bollard, something caught my eye. A small streak of blue paint marked the metal where it met the ground. I knew enough about construction markings to know it wasn't random. I took a picture. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew one thing. Someone had measured this road before they blocked it. When I opened my mailbox that afternoon, I found a certified letter from the HOA. The notice inside was dated 2 days earlier. Before the workers arrived. Before the sign went up. Before anyone had spoken to me. And at the bottom of the page was the question I couldn't shake. How had Victoria approved a project on my road before she ever told me it existed? I spent that night sitting at my kitchen table with the certified letter beside me, the same way I used to study engineering plans before approving a project. I didn't rush. I didn't call Victoria angry. Anger makes mistakes, and mistakes are exactly what people like her wait for. Instead, I built a timeline. The steel bollards were installed Tuesday morning. The sign appeared Tuesday morning. The HOA notice was dated Monday. That meant the decision had already been made before I ever knew there was a decision. The next morning, I walked the road again with my phone, a measuring tape, and the old survey map from my property records. The gravel crunched under my boots as I checked every change. A few feet from the new sign, I found another detail that bothered me. The original wooden marker showing the edge of my access road had been moved. Not removed. Moved. Someone had carefully pulled it from the ground and placed it about 6 feet closer to my property line. That wasn't construction. That was correction. Or someone's version of correction. I photographed everything and marked the locations on my copy of the survey. Then I drove to the Cedar Ridge HOA office, a small brick building behind the community clubhouse. Victoria was already expecting me. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was the folder sitting open on her desk. She had my road map printed out before I walked through the door. "Ethan," she said calmly. "I was hoping we could have a productive conversation." I placed my photos on the table. "I'm hoping for the same thing. But I need to understand why your contractor moved my property markers." Her expression didn't change. We had professional contractors handling the project. That wasn't my question. For the first time, her fingers tightened slightly around her pen. She leaned back. "The community has grown. Cedar Ridge has responsibilities now that it didn't have years ago." I looked at the map on her desk. "Responsibilities don't change property lines." Victoria gave me a small smile. "No one is changing property lines." That answer should have made me feel better. It didn't, because she still wasn't saying the road belonged to them. She was saying something much more careful. They didn't need ownership. They only needed control. When I got home, I found a notice attached to my front gate. Not mailed. Attached. The paper warned that unauthorized interference with HOA emergency infrastructure could result in fines. I stared at the word interference. My own road. My own entrance. And somehow I was now the person interfering. Sarah read the notice over my shoulder while the late afternoon sun reflected off the metal bollards at the end of the driveway. "This is getting bigger," she said quietly. She was right. That evening, I started looking into Cedar Ridge's recent development plans. I wasn't searching for a fight. I was trying to understand why an HOA would spend money installing steel barriers on private property. Then I found the answer that changed the direction of everything. 3 new houses had been approved in the latest Cedar Ridge expansion. All 3 listings mentioned the same feature: direct emergency access through Caldwell Road. I read that line 3 times. Caldwell Road. My road. The next morning, I returned to the entrance and looked at the new sign again. The metal letters reflected the sunlight like they had always belonged there. But something didn't fit. If this was just about safety, why were they advertising my private road as part of their development? And why had they started building the solution before anyone had officially explained the problem? The next morning, I stopped looking at the Bollards as a homeowner. I looked at them as an engineer. I parked my truck at the edge of Caldwell Road and walked the entire 400-yard stretch with the county survey map rolled under my arm. The air smelled like damp gravel and diesel from the construction equipment still sitting near the entrance. The workers were gone, but the evidence they left behind was everywhere. Fresh drill marks. New concrete collars around the steel posts. Scraped soil where the old markers used to be. Someone had changed this road physically, and now I needed to understand exactly how. I started with the thing that bothered me most. The blue paint mark. I had seen those markings thousands of times during my career. Survey crews, utility companies, and emergency planners all used different colors for different purposes. Blue usually meant something specific. Water, infrastructure, critical reference points. But I wasn't going to guess. I called a former colleague who worked on municipal projects and sent him a photo. 20 minutes later, he called me back. "That mark isn't random," he said. "Looks like a field reference point. Someone was measuring for a plan." "For what kind of plan?" A pause. "Could be a lot of things. But nobody marks a private road like that unless they're designing around it." That answer gave me a direction, but not the answer. So I went to the county planning office. I didn't walk in angry. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply asked to review the development records for Cedar Ridge Estates. The clerk pulled up the files, and after a few minutes, she handed me a stack of printed documents. "Recent expansion permits are all public record," she said. I started comparing. The first map showed the Cedar Ridge subdivision boundary. The second showed the emergency access plan. The third showed the approved home sites. At first glance, everything looked normal. Then I placed the maps side by side. The lines didn't match. The emergency access route on the HOA's plan ran directly through Caldwell Road, my road. But the property boundary map showed something different. The road was outside Cedar Ridge. I traced the lines with my finger. The problem wasn't that they misunderstood where the road was. They knew exactly where it was. Someone had drawn the emergency route across land they did not own. I took photos of the documents and asked the clerk one more question. "Who submitted this access plan?" She checked the file. "Cedar Ridge Development Group." "Not the HOA." "No, the developer." That was the first time the pieces started connecting. This wasn't just Victoria making an aggressive HOA decision. There was money behind it. When I got back home, I found a truck parked near the entrance. Not a construction truck, a landscaping company. The driver was standing beside the new sign, taking measurements. I walked over. "Can I help you?" He looked uncomfortable. "I'm just here for the entrance landscaping." "Who hired you?" He pointed toward the subdivision. "Cedar Ridge." I looked at the sign behind him. The one claiming my road was their emergency access route. Then I looked at the plans in my hand. The same route. The same mistake. Except it wasn't a mistake anymore. That evening, I pulled out the old property file from when I bought the land. Buried between tax records and closing documents was a faded copy from the previous owner, Harold Whitman. One sentence caught my attention. Emergency access reserved only under private conditions. No public roadway designation. I read it again, and suddenly the problem changed shape. The HOA wasn't trying to take my road because they liked the location. They needed it. Because without Caldwell Road, their expansion plan didn't have the emergency access they promised. The next morning, I made one decision. I wasn't going to argue with Victoria anymore. I was going to find out how many homes had been approved using a road that was never theirs to use. The morning after I found Harold Whitman's note, I made the mistake of thinking silence meant Victoria didn't know what I had discovered. I was wrong. By noon, she was already moving. I knew because a Cedar Ridge security truck rolled up to my gate while I was unloading materials from my garage. The vehicle had the HOA logo on the side, a flashing amber light on top, and a man in a uniform holding a clipboard like he was inspecting a crime scene. "Mr. Caldwell," he called. I walked toward him, but stopped several feet away. "Yes. I'm here to document unauthorized interference with community emergency infrastructure." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I looked past him at my own driveway, where the steel bollards blocked the entrance like a checkpoint. "Community infrastructure?" He pointed toward the sign. "Cedar Ridge Access Route." That was the moment I realized Victoria had changed the battlefield. She wasn't arguing with me anymore. She was creating a record. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Not dramatically. Not to intimidate him. Just documenting. The security guard noticed. "Are you recording?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I want an accurate record of what happens on my property." He didn't argue. He simply wrote something on his clipboard and drove away. That choice ended up being important later. At the time, it just felt like the only smart thing I could do. That afternoon, I called Daniel Brooks at the county office and asked about the emergency access documents I had reviewed. Before he could answer, he hesitated. "Ethan, I need to tell you something." My stomach tightened. "What?" "There have been questions raised about your involvement." "My involvement?" "Cedar Ridge claims you're resisting a safety project." I looked out my kitchen window toward the road. The same road where they had installed barriers. The same road they were now claiming I was blocking. Victoria wasn't just changing the property. She was changing the story. By the end of the week, the pressure spread. A neighbor stopped me near the mailbox and lowered his voice. "Ethan, what's going on? People are saying you're preventing emergency access." I looked back at the yellow bollards glowing in the afternoon sun. "I'm trying to understand why my private road became part of a development plan without my permission." He looked uncomfortable. "I don't know." Victoria said the county approved everything. That sentence bothered me, because I knew how convincing Victoria could be. She didn't act like someone breaking rules. She acted like someone protecting the community. And that made her dangerous. Then came the financial hit. A certified letter arrived from the HOA claiming my property had violated access regulations because I had interfered with emergency route operations. Attached was a bill, not a fine, an assessment. $4,800 for road coordination and infrastructure management. I read it twice. They had blocked my road, then billed me for managing it. Sarah stood beside me holding the paper. "They're trying to make you look unreasonable," she said. She was right. Every move they made was designed to create a simple picture. Victoria was protecting safety. I was causing problems. That weekend, I went back to the entrance with my camera and checked the area around the bollards. The blue paint mark was still there, but now something else caught my attention. A fresh metal stake had been driven into the ground beside the road. It wasn't part of the original construction. It had a small tag attached. Cedar Ridge Phase 2. Phase 2. I took a photo. Then another. Because suddenly I understood something. The bollards weren't the project. They were preparation for the project. 2 days later, Victoria's attorney sent a formal notice demanding that I stop contacting contractors, county officials, and inspectors regarding Cedar Ridge development. And then came the move I never expected. The HOA filed for a temporary court order to keep the bollards in place and restrict my ability to challenge the access route until the matter was resolved. For the first time since this started, I looked down my own road and realized something. They weren't trying to convince me anymore. They were trying to outlast me. The courtroom smelled like old wood and paper when the judge granted the temporary order. I sat there listening as Cedar Ridge's attorney described my private road as a critical emergency access corridor and my objections as a threat to neighborhood safety. Those words bothered me more than the ruling, because they sounded reasonable. That was Victoria's talent. She never walked into a room looking like the villain. She walked in looking like the person trying to protect everyone else. The judge didn't decide who owned the road. Not yet. But until the full review, the steel bollards stayed. And I had to stop interfering with Cedar Ridge's access project. When the gavel came down, I looked over at Victoria. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. She had already won the moment. 3 days later, the consequences showed up at my front door. A contractor I had hired for a drainage project called me. "Ethan, I hate to do this, but we need to pause." "Why?" He hesitated. "Your property dispute came up during our insurance review. They're worried about liability." I looked across my backyard toward the equipment sitting near the fence. The excavator, the stacks of pipe, everything ready to begin. Then, one by one, the machines were loaded back onto trailers. The sound of diesel engines leaving my property felt louder than the day the bollards went in. That project was worth $18,000. Not enough to destroy me. Enough to hurt. But the bigger damage came from somewhere else. My engineering client called the following week. The company had been working with me on a rural roadway design project for months. I knew the team. They knew my work. Usually, those calls started with numbers and deadlines. This one started with silence. "Ethan," the project manager said, "we're putting things on hold." I leaned back in my chair. "Because of Cedar Ridge?" Another pause. "We don't want to get involved in a property dispute." There it was. Not a lawsuit. Not a loss in court. Just a reputation problem. The kind that follows you quietly. The kind you can't fix with a single document. By Friday, the story around Cedar Ridge had changed. At first, people had asked questions. Now they had opinions. A neighbor who used to wave from his driveway stopped making eye contact. Someone posted online that I was blocking emergency services. Nobody mentioned that the barriers blocking access had been installed by someone else. They only saw the story Victoria created. Sarah found me sitting at the kitchen table that night with the same property maps spread out in front of me. "Are you okay?" I looked at the papers. "I don't know." That was the first time I admitted it. Not to Victoria. Not to the court. To myself. Maybe I had underestimated how powerful a good story could be when the facts were still hidden. The next morning, I walked down to the entrance road. The steel bollards stood exactly where they had been placed. Bright. Clean. Official looking. A small sign had been added beside them. Cedar Ridge Emergency Access Improvement Project. Below it was a permit number. I photographed it. Then I noticed something. The permit number was printed on a temporary construction placard. But the approval date was after the bollards were already installed. I checked the photo from the first day. The original sign. The original bollards. The construction crew. All of it existed before this permit date. I stood there with my phone in my hand, looking at the timeline. Victoria had spent weeks proving she was organized, careful, prepared. But maybe she had been too eager to make everything look official. Because in the middle of her victory, she had left behind something she didn't realize mattered. A timestamp. A physical record. Proof that the project existed before the permission to build it. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry. Because for the first time in weeks, the pieces were finally sitting still long enough for me to see the shape of the problem. The permit date. The steel bollards. The blue survey mark. The shifted property marker. None of those things made sense alone. Together, they started telling a different story. The next morning, I printed every photo I had taken since the first day. I spread them across my dining room table beside the county records and the old survey documents from Harold Whitman. Sarah watched me move papers around for almost an hour. "You're building a timeline," she said. I nodded. "I'm trying to find where reality and their paperwork stop matching." The first thing I checked was the construction permit. The approval date was clear. The problem was the installation date. I opened the original photos from the day the bollards went in and zoomed in on the background details. The weather. The workers, the sign, the equipment. Then I compared them with the county file photos attached to the permit. Same entrance, same road, different timeline. The county's official record showed approval after the work was already visible on the ground. That wasn't enough by itself. I knew that. Construction projects sometimes have amendments, corrections, paperwork delays. I needed more. So I went back to the road. This time, I brought my old survey equipment from my truck and checked the marker placement myself. The gravel was packed hard around the steel posts, but 6 feet away, half covered by dirt and weeds, I found the original disturbed area where the wooden boundary marker had been moved. The soil told the story. Fresh disturbance. Older ground beneath it. Someone had moved the marker before they installed the entrance improvements. I photographed everything. Then I called Daniel Brooks. I need another look at the access route, I told him. There was a pause. Ethan, you know this is becoming a formal issue now. I know. And Victoria will fight it. I know that too. Another pause. Send me what you have. That was the first moment in weeks where it felt like I wasn't standing alone. But I still wasn't ready to show everything. I had learned something from Victoria. The first person to reveal their entire strategy usually loses control of the situation. So I created copies of every file. Photos, emails, the permit records, the HOA notices, the video from the security guard incident. Everything went onto 2 separate drives. One stayed in my office. The other went into a safe deposit box. Not because I expected disaster. Because I had spent my career around construction projects, and I knew one simple rule. If something matters, protect it before someone says it doesn't exist. Later that week, I called Mike Alvarez from the fire department. I didn't ask him to take my side. I asked him to look at the road. That was the difference. When he arrived, he walked the entrance quietly, measuring distances and checking the turning area where emergency vehicles would need to maneuver. He looked at the bollards. Then he looked back at the road. That's interesting, he said. What? The access plan shows a wider clearance than what's actually here. He pulled out the development map. I pulled out the county survey. 2 maps. Same road. Different reality. Mike looked between them. Who created this emergency access drawing? I didn't answer, because I wanted to know the same thing. That evening, I sat at my desk and prepared the next step. Not a lawsuit. Not a public accusation. A formal request. A county emergency access audit of the Cedar Ridge expansion. Before I submitted it, I looked once more at the photo of the first steel bollard. The blue paint mark was barely visible. A tiny detail everyone else ignored. But it had led me here. I attached the evidence package, signed the request, and sent it to the county review office. For the first time since the bollards appeared, I wasn't reacting to Victoria's moves. I was forcing the next one. The county scheduled the emergency access audit for a Thursday morning. I knew that day could change everything. I also knew it could go badly. If the inspector found nothing wrong, Victoria would have exactly what she wanted. The court order would stay in place, the bollards would remain, and my argument would look like nothing more than a frustrated homeowner fighting a community project. That was the risk. So I didn't walk into the inspection trying to win. I walked in trying to preserve the truth. The morning was cold and quiet when I arrived at Caldwell Road. The steel bollards stood at the entrance, bright yellow against the gray gravel. They looked almost permanent now, like they had always belonged there. Victoria arrived 10 minutes later. Of course she did. She stepped out of her SUV carrying the same leather folder I had seen weeks earlier. She wasn't nervous. That told me something. She still believed she controlled the story. Daniel Brooks arrived with 2 county representatives and a set of updated plans from Cedar Ridge. Mike Alvarez came in his department vehicle and parked near the entrance. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody needed to. The tension was already sitting there between the concrete and the steel. Daniel walked toward the bollards. Who authorized this installation? Victoria answered immediately. The Cedar Ridge Development Committee approved the Emergency Access Improvement Project after consultation with our contractors. Was the road dedication completed? Daniel asked. Victoria didn't hesitate. The access agreement has been in process. That answer caught my attention, not because it was surprising, because she chose those words carefully. Not completed. In process. Daniel looked down at his paperwork. Then this road is still private property? Victoria smiled slightly. It's being used for a community safety purpose. A few weeks earlier, that sentence would have frustrated me. Now I listened differently. She wasn't denying anything. She was defining it. Mike walked the entrance with his measuring equipment. He checked the turning radius, the clearance width, and the distance between the bollards. Then he pulled out the Cedar Ridge emergency access map, the one I had seen at the county office. He looked at the paper, then at the road, then back at the paper. The dimensions here don't match what's on the ground. Victoria stepped closer. Those plans were prepared by professionals. I'm aware, Mike said. His tone stayed calm. But the road still has to meet the requirement. That was when Victoria turned toward me. Not angry. Not yet. Confident. This is exactly what I was concerned about, she said. Mr. Caldwell has been interfering with a safety project from the beginning. He's created delays, contacted contractors, and now he's forcing inspections that could affect hundreds of residents. There it was. The story she had been building. I let her finish, because I needed her to keep talking. Daniel looked at the documents in Victoria's folder. Can I see the original access submission? She handed it over without hesitation. That was her mistake. Not because the document was fake, because she believed it would help her. I watched Daniel flip through the pages. Then I saw it. The same engineering summary I had found before. The same measurements. The same route diagram. But now it was official. Presented by Victoria. On record. Mike noticed something too. He pointed at the emergency clearance measurement. This number came from a field survey. Victoria nodded. Yes. Performed when? She looked at the page. During the original planning phase. Daniel checked another document. The planning phase before the bollards were installed? Yes. The answer came quickly. Too quickly. The silence afterward felt heavier than any argument. Because everyone in that driveway understood the problem. The emergency access plan depended on measurements taken before the physical changes were made. Before the bollards. Before the moved markers. Before the road was altered. Victoria looked at me like she thought I had lost. Like she believed the inspection had only confirmed her position. She gathered her folder and stepped back. Hopefully this finally puts an end to unnecessary accusations. I didn't respond. I just looked at Daniel holding the documents. At Mike holding the measurements. At the bollards standing exactly where Victoria had ordered them placed. The blue paint mark was still there. The original reference point. The one detail she never thought mattered. And in that moment, I knew. The final piece wasn't hidden anymore. She had just placed it into the record herself. The county hearing room was quieter than I expected. No shouting. No dramatic arguments. Just the sound of papers moving across tables and the low hum of the air conditioner above us. That was the thing about real consequences. They rarely arrived with fireworks. They arrived with people reading documents carefully. Victoria sat across from me with her attorney beside her. She looked exactly the same as she had from the beginning. Calm. Prepared. Certain. She still believed the story she built was stronger than the facts underneath it. Daniel Brooks placed the emergency access file on the table. Mike Alvarez sat beside him with his inspection notes. The county officials reviewed everything one piece at a time. The first document was the access plan Victoria submitted during the audit. Daniel pointed to the route drawing. This plan identifies Caldwell Road as the emergency access corridor. Victoria nodded. Yes, that has always been the purpose of the route. Daniel placed another document beside it. The original property survey. The problem is that Caldwell Road is not owned by Cedar Ridge. Victoria leaned forward. We never claimed ownership. That was a good answer. A careful answer. And for a moment, I could see why people believed her. But Daniel didn't argue. He simply moved to the next page. Correct. You claimed emergency access rights. He tapped the document. And those rights depend on this plan being accurate. The room went quiet. The first piece changed the assumption. This was no longer about whether Victoria owned my road. It was about whether she built an entire development plan around access she did not have. Then came the second piece. The construction timeline. Daniel placed the permit records beside the photos from my phone. The same entrance. The same steel bollards. The same sign. Different dates. The photos showed the emergency access project already physically installed before the approval paperwork was completed. Victoria's attorney immediately responded. Construction preparation can happen before final administrative processing. Daniel nodded. It can. Then he placed one more image on the screen. The county permit photo. The issue is not preparation. The image showed the finished bollards. The issue is that the approved design was not the design that existed when the work was performed. I looked around the room. Nobody said anything, but I could feel the shift. The same people who had spent weeks hearing that I was blocking safety were now looking at the barriers differently. Then Mike brought out the measurements. The third piece, the one that connected everything. He placed the emergency access map next to his field measurements. The plan shows a wider clearance area than what exists today. Victoria's attorney stood. Mr. Alvarez, construction changes can occur. Mike looked at him. Exactly. He pointed toward the measurements. Which is why emergency access must be verified after construction. He paused. The route being advertised to residents does not match the route available to emergency vehicles. That was the moment the room changed. Not because anyone celebrated. Because nobody had a response. The final piece came from the thing Victoria had used against me. Her own presentation. Her own statement. Her own confidence. Daniel pulled up the recording from the inspection. Victoria's voice filled the room. The access agreement has been in process. Then another question. Was the road dedication completed? Her answer. No. The silence afterward felt different this time. Not uncomfortable. Final. Victoria tried one last time. This was done for the community. We were trying to protect property values and emergency safety. And maybe she believed that. Maybe somewhere along the way, she convinced herself that the goal justified every shortcut. But the records didn't care about intentions. The measurements didn't care about appearances. The steel bollards didn't care about the speeches. They were physical evidence of the moment the plan became reality before permission existed. The county officials gathered the documents. Daniel closed the folder. Then came the sentence I had been waiting for. Effective immediately, Cedar Ridge is ordered to stop all expansion activity connected to this emergency access plan, pending full compliance review. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Victoria looked down at the table. For the first time since this started, she didn't look like someone in control. She looked like someone realizing the story had changed without her permission. The first thing I noticed was the silence. For weeks, Caldwell Road had been filled with noise. Drills. Engines. Construction crews. People arguing over something that had always been simple. That morning, there was only the sound of gravel under my boots. The county order took effect immediately. Cedar Ridge had to stop all work connected to the emergency access plan, and the steel bollards that had started this entire fight were scheduled for removal. I stood at the entrance while the contractor's crew returned. The same kind of equipment, the same kind of workers, but everything felt different. The first time they arrived, they came to change my property. This time, they came to restore it. The yellow steel posts came out one by one. The concrete collars around them cracked and broke apart as the workers pulled them free. When the last bollard was lifted onto the trailer, sunlight reached the gravel beneath it for the first time in months. I walked over and looked at the ground. The blue paint mark was still there. Faded. Almost hidden. But still visible. The small detail everyone ignored had survived the entire fight. A few days later, the sign came down. Cedar Ridge Estates Emergency Access Route. The letters disappeared from the road entrance, replaced by a simple county-approved marker, Private Road. Emergency access by permission. Only seeing those words felt strange. Not because I needed a sign to prove what I owned. Because for a while, it felt like everyone else had forgotten. The county review also forced Cedar Ridge to correct the records connected to the expansion project. The homes that had been marketed with direct access through Caldwell Road had to update their information and complete proper emergency access planning. No one lost their homes. No one was thrown out. That was never what I wanted. The problem wasn't the people who bought those houses. The problem was the shortcuts taken before they ever arrived. Victoria stepped down as HOA president a month later. I heard about it from Sarah, not from any official announcement. She was sitting at the kitchen table one evening, reading an email from one of our neighbors. The board is restructuring, she said. I nodded. That's probably the right thing. Sarah looked at me for a moment. You're not angry? I looked outside toward the road. I had been angry. For a long time. But anger was never what fixed anything. What mattered was that the truth finally had somewhere to stand. The biggest surprise came from my neighbors. The same people who had avoided eye contact started stopping by again. One afternoon, the man who had questioned me near the mailbox came over while I was working in the garage. Ethan, he said, looking embarrassed. I owe you an apology. I wiped my hands on a rag. For what? For believing the first story I heard. I understood that. Most people don't choose sides because they hate someone. They choose based on what they can see. And for a while, Victoria had made sure they saw only what she wanted them to see. A few months later, my drainage project finally restarted. The contractor's trucks rolled down Caldwell Road without stopping. No barriers, no security guards, no arguments. Just a normal road again. One evening, Sarah and I stood at the entrance watching the sunset reflect off the gravel. The property marker had been reset where it belonged, and the road stretched quietly toward our house. I walked over to the old workshop shelf where I kept the original bollard with the blue paint mark. Not as a trophy, not as a reminder of Victoria. As a reminder of the moment everything changed. The day someone tried to take control of my road. They thought the steel would be the strongest thing they left behind. They were wrong. The road was mine again, and it was quiet.